The morning my son-in-law's hand struck my face, I didn't fall. I didn't shout. I didn't even raise my hand to defend myself. I simply stood there, tasting blood where my tooth had cut the inside of my lip, and stared at the man who had just hit me. Then I looked at my daughter. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, holding her travel mug, wearing the expensive suit she used for work. She had watched everything, and instead of running to me, she sighed. "You really provoked him this time, Dad." Those words hurt more than the slap. My name is Henry Blackwood. I'm 72 years old, and for 40 years I worked as a structural engineer in Chicago. I spent my life calculating pressure, stress, weight, and failure. I knew exactly what happened when a structure carried more weight than its foundation could handle. Eventually something breaks. For 5 years I had watched my family slowly become that kind of structure. My son-in-law, Marcus, had started treating my home like it belonged to him. That morning he stormed into the kitchen carrying a folder. He threw it against my chest. "Sign it." I opened the folder. A second mortgage, a predatory interest rate, and my Lake Geneva property listed as collateral. "Absolutely not," I said. Marcus's face reddened. "You don't understand business." "I understand debt," I replied. "And you're drowning in it." He stepped closer. "You live under my roof." I looked him directly in the eyes. "My name is on the deed." His jaw tightened. Then came the slap. My glasses flew across the floor. They landed beside the kitchen table and cracked. I had worn those glasses while supervising construction projects worth millions of dollars. And now, they were broken, because a man I had welcomed into my family believed I was standing between him and his next payday. I looked at my daughter. "Claire." "Claire?" She avoided my eyes. "Why do you make everything difficult?" she whispered. "Just sign the papers so we can have some peace." Something inside me went silent. Not angry, not emotional. Just finished. Marcus straightened his jacket. "Have dinner ready by 7. He smiled. "I'm bringing my lawyer and the notary. Tonight, we celebrate." Then he and Claire walked away. Their Porsche disappeared down the driveway. I stood alone in my kitchen. For years I had repaired every crack, covered every bill, solved every problem, protected people who never protected me. But that morning, I made a different decision. I wasn't going to repair the crack anymore. I was going to expose the entire foundation. And by 7 o'clock that evening, Marcus was going to learn exactly whose house he had been standing in. I walked downstairs to the basement office. Marcus called it my dungeon. He joked that old men belonged in rooms like that, surrounded by dusty books and useless papers. He had no idea what was hidden beneath the floor. I pulled back the rug. Underneath was a steel panel I had installed myself decades earlier. I opened the safe. Inside were 6 months of evidence. Bank statements, emails, photographs, transaction records, and a burner phone. I had started collecting everything 6 months earlier. Because I had noticed something. Money was disappearing. My accounts were being accessed. Marcus was making strange investments. And whenever I asked questions, Claire suddenly became too busy to answer. I picked up the phone and called an old friend. "Daniel?" A deep voice answered. "Henry, it's time." Daniel wasn't just my old chess partner. He was now a senior federal prosecutor in Chicago. Years earlier I had helped his family when they were struggling. He had never forgotten it. I told him about the slap. Then I told him about the mortgage. Finally I told him about the dinner. "He's bringing his lawyer," I said, "and I want you there." There was silence. "Henry, what exactly are you planning?" I looked at the evidence spread across my desk. A controlled demolition. Daniel laughed quietly. "You always did like your engineering metaphors. Then you'll appreciate this one." I hung up. Before leaving for the market, I went upstairs to Marcus's office. His computer was unlocked. That arrogance was going to cost him. I checked the trash folder. There it was. A withdrawal from my retirement account. $200,000. Transferred to a company I had never heard of. And the signature? Mine. Almost perfect. But not perfect enough. Marcus had copied my signature. He had gotten one tiny loop wrong. After 40 years of signing engineering documents, I knew my own handwriting better than I knew most people's faces. Then I saw something worse. An unsent email to a financial journalist. It accused me of approving unsafe construction materials on one of the most important buildings I had ever worked on. The accusation was completely false. But Marcus had a reason for creating it. He had placed a massive bet against the company connected to that project. If the accusation became public, the company's stock would collapse. Marcus would get rich, and my reputation would be destroyed. He wasn't simply stealing my money. He was preparing to destroy my name so he could profit from it. I photographed everything: the bank transfer, the email, the trading records, every piece of evidence. Then I returned everything exactly where I found it. Marcus wouldn't know I had seen it. Not yet. At 7 o'clock he was expecting dinner. He thought he was walking into a signing ceremony. He had no idea he was walking into the final night of his freedom. I went shopping. Not at the cheap grocery store where I usually compared prices. That afternoon, I bought the most expensive meal I had prepared in years: Wagyu beef, black truffles, a bottle of vintage wine. Marcus loved expensive things. So I decided his final dinner should be memorable. When my old colleague Thomas saw the bruise on my cheek, he froze. What happened? I smiled. I'm celebrating the end of an era. He looked confused. You okay? Better than I've been in years. He had no idea what I meant. When I returned home, I turned the kitchen into a battlefield. I seared the beef quickly over intense heat. Hot, fast, decisive. That was how you tempered steel. And that was how I intended to handle Marcus. Claire came downstairs early. She looked at the expensive ingredients. Dad, what are you doing? Cooking dinner. With what money? My money. She stared at me. For a moment, something almost resembling concern crossed her face. Then, she misunderstood everything. I'm proud of you, she said softly. Maybe you're finally accepting that things have changed. I said nothing. She thought I was giving up. She thought I was preparing to surrender. She had no idea I was preparing to take everything back. At exactly 7, the doorbell rang. Marcus walked in first. His lawyer, Victor, followed. Marcus was wearing an expensive suit and enough cologne to fill the hallway. He smiled like a man who had already won. Dad, Claire said. This is Victor. Victor placed a briefcase on the table. Inside were mortgage documents. Marcus sat down. You ready to sign? I smiled. Dinner first. He laughed. Fine. Then the doorbell rang again. Marcus frowned. I didn't invite anyone. I know. I walked to the door. When I opened it, 2 people stood outside. Daniel Reed, my old friend and federal prosecutor, and Victoria Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Construction. Marcus recognized her immediately. His smile disappeared. His face went pale. Victoria stepped inside. Good evening, Henry. Victoria, I replied. Marcus looked between us. How do you 2 know each other? Victoria smiled. Henry taught me everything I know about structural engineering. Marcus stared at me. I could almost hear the calculation happening in his head. The man he thought was an aging retiree suddenly had a direct relationship with one of the most powerful executives in the industry. We sat down. Marcus tried to regain control. He started talking about modern finance, digital assets, leverage, moving capital, creating wealth. Then he looked at me. You wouldn't understand, Henry. You worked with concrete. Victoria lifted her glass. Interesting, Marcus smiled. She continued. Because concrete is stronger than people think. Daniel leaned back. And weak foundations are weaker than people realize. Marcus stopped smiling. He still didn't understand. But he was beginning to feel something. Fear. And he was about to discover exactly why. Dinner continued. Marcus kept talking. The louder he became, the more nervous he looked. He didn't realize he was digging his own grave with every sentence. Daniel finally placed his fork down. Funny thing, he said casually, a pattern has recently crossed my desk. Marcus looked up. What kind of pattern? Large financial positions against Sterling Construction. Victoria's expression remained calm. Daniel continued. Shell companies, offshore accounts, money moving through several layers. Marcus's hand stopped halfway to his glass. Daniel looked directly at him. And one of the transactions appears connected to someone in this room. Marcus's fork slipped. It hit the plate with a sharp metallic sound. Who are you? Daniel smiled. That's not the important question. Marcus looked at me. What did you do? I stood. Slowly, I walked to the center of the table. Then I lifted the silver serving dome. Marcus expected Wagyu. Instead, he saw a thick report, a federal seal, and a USB drive. I placed them in front of him. Enjoy your meal. His breathing changed. It's going to be a long night. Marcus grabbed the mortgage documents. Sign this now. He pushed them across the table. You need to cover my margin call tomorrow morning. Victoria picked up the document. She read it carefully. Then she laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just enough to make Marcus understand how badly he had miscalculated. This document is worthless. Marcus stared at her. What? You don't own this house. His face changed. I leaned back. Victoria continued. Neither does your wife. Marcus looked at Claire. Claire looked at me. What is she talking about? I reached into my jacket. The property belongs to the Blackwood Family Trust. Claire's lips parted. I had created the trust 10 years earlier, the moment I realized how Marcus treated money. For years they had believed they owned the house. They never did. They were guests. Guests who didn't pay rent. Guests who treated the owner like hired help. Marcus stood suddenly. You tricked us. No, I looked at him. I protected myself. You owe me. I owe you nothing. He started shouting. He called me selfish. He called me senile. He said I had ruined his life. I waited until he finished. Then I tore the mortgage papers directly down the middle. Never, I said. Not $1. He stared at the torn papers. You created this problem. I leaned forward. Now you can climb out of it. His face went white. But you're not dragging me down with you. Then I reached for the second silver platter. Marcus watched my hands. What's under that? I smiled. Dessert. I lifted the second silver dome. There was no dessert. Inside was a printed conversation. Marcus and Victor had written everything down. Plans to take control of my finances. Plans to convince doctors that I was mentally incapable of managing my own affairs. Plans to have me declared incompetent. And eventually, they planned to send me away. A cheap facility. Somewhere far from the house. Somewhere nobody would ask questions. Marcus had even written a cruel description of the man he intended to become once my money was gone. Claire leaned closer. She read the messages. Her face changed. Marcus. He reached for the papers. No. She pulled them away. You wrote this? It's not what it looks like. It says Dad is going to be a vegetable. Marcus swallowed. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. For the first time that night, Claire looked at him with fear, not anger. Fear. Daniel placed another document on the table. A forensic report. The money stolen from my retirement account. The forged signature. The offshore transactions. The trading activity against Victoria's company. Then came the USB drive. Marcus stared at it. What's on that? Evidence, Daniel replied. Marcus suddenly started yelling. You can't do this. Daniel remained calm. Actually, we can. Marcus accused me of being paranoid, then senile, then confused. Finally, he claimed the evidence had been illegally obtained. I watched him unravel. For years, he had treated me like an old man whose opinion didn't matter. Now every word he had used against me was collapsing around him. He looked at Claire. Tell them. Claire said nothing. Claire. Still nothing. He shouted again. Tell them, your father is confused. She looked down at the papers, then back at me, and finally, she whispered, I can't. Marcus froze. That was the moment he realized he was alone. Daniel stood. He reached into his coat. Then he showed his badge. Marcus Hale, you are under arrest. Marcus pushed his chair backward. No, federal agents entered through the front door. Marcus ran. He made it 3 steps toward the patio before agents tackled him. The expensive suit he had worn to celebrate his victory hit the floor. Victor didn't wait. The moment he saw the handcuffs, he started cooperating. He gave investigators names, accounts, transactions, everything. Marcus screamed at him. You coward. Victor looked at him. I'm protecting myself. Marcus was taken outside. The same man who had slapped me that morning was now being led away in handcuffs. I didn't celebrate. I didn't laugh. I simply stood there. Because revenge wasn't about hurting him. It was about making sure he could never hurt me again. Then Claire crawled toward me, crying, begging, saying she was a victim too. But there was one question I needed her to answer, and she already knew what it was. Claire grabbed my trousers. Dad, please. Her face was soaked with tears. I didn't know everything he was doing. Maybe that was true. Maybe she really hadn't known about the worst parts. But there was something she could never explain away. I looked down at her. You watched him hit me. She stopped crying. You stood in that doorway. Her eyes dropped. You didn't scream. Silence. You didn't call the police. I felt the old pain return. You told me I was annoying him. Claire whispered my name. I continued. You chose your side that morning. She shook her head. No. Dad, please. I was scared. I know. I pulled an envelope from my pocket. She stared at it. What is that? Your eviction notice. Her face collapsed. 24 hours. She looked at the house. Our home? No, I shook my head. My home. She started begging. Then she turned toward Victoria. Please, you know me. I work for your company. Victoria's expression was cold. Your employment has been terminated. Claire stared at her. What? For cause. The words hit her like another slap. Her husband was under arrest. Her career was gone. The house was never hers. And the inheritance she had assumed would eventually come to her was protected inside the trust. In less than 10 minutes, the life Claire thought was permanent had disappeared. She looked at me. You're really doing this? I felt tears burning behind my eyes. Because, despite everything, she was still my daughter. But loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to destroy you. I spent years protecting you from consequences. I looked at the broken glasses still sitting on the kitchen floor. Today I'm letting you meet them. Claire packed in silence. Upstairs, I could hear drawers opening, suitcases dragging, closet doors slamming. Every sound felt like the closing of a chapter. When the front door finally slammed, the house became quiet. But this silence was different. It wasn't the suffocating silence I had lived with for years. It was peace. Victoria joined me in the living room. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a dividend check. Millions of dollars. Money connected to an old investment I had made decades earlier. I stared at the number. I didn't need it. I already had my pension, my property, my savings, and now, my freedom. Victoria asked, "What are you going to do with it?" I looked toward the fireplace, then toward a photograph of my late wife, Martha. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I wasn't going to build another mansion. I wasn't going to buy another luxury car. I wasn't going to prove anything to anyone. I was going to build something that mattered. A place for elderly people whose own families had tried to steal their dignity. A place with lawyers, doctors, financial protection, and doors that actually locked. A place where aging wasn't treated like weakness. I smiled. I'm going to build a new foundation. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows. For the first time in years, I woke up without hearing Marcus's voice downstairs. No arguments. No demands. No footsteps coming toward my bedroom. Just silence. Peaceful silence. I walked into the living room and looked at the photograph of Martha. She had been gone for years. But that morning I felt like she was beside me. I poured 2 glasses of wine. One for me. One for her. To new foundations, I whispered. Daniel eventually arrived with updates. Marcus was facing serious federal charges. Victor was cooperating. The financial investigation was expanding. The money stolen from my retirement account was being traced. And Victoria's company had survived the attack Marcus had planned. But none of that was what mattered most to me. The center did. I named it the Martha Blackwood Center. Victoria offered construction materials at cost. Daniel offered legal support. And I used my money to create something far more valuable than revenge. Protection. I wanted elderly people to have somewhere to turn when the people they trusted most became the people trying to control them. Because I had learned something that day. Family doesn't automatically mean loyalty. Blood doesn't automatically mean love. And patience doesn't automatically earn respect. Sometimes, people see kindness as weakness. Sometimes, they mistake silence for stupidity. Marcus had made that mistake. Claire had made it too. They thought my age made me powerless. They forgot that I had spent 40 years understanding pressure, understanding weight, understanding what happens when something is pushed beyond its limits. A building doesn't collapse because of one tiny crack. It collapses because people ignore the cracks for too long. And I had ignored mine. For years. I paid the bills. I covered their mistakes. I protected their secrets. I convinced myself that keeping the family together was worth sacrificing my own dignity. It wasn't. Love without boundaries isn't always love. Sometimes, it's simply permission. Permission for someone else to keep taking. Keep demanding. Keep hurting. Until there is nothing left of you. That day, I finally stopped giving permission. I didn't destroy Marcus. His own choices did that. I didn't ruin Claire's life. Her decisions brought her to that doorstep. I simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of what they had chosen. And maybe that's the hardest lesson of all. You can love someone deeply and still walk away. You can forgive someone and still refuse to trust them. You can wish someone well and still lock your door. I looked around my home, the same house where Marcus had called me a parasite, the same kitchen where he had slapped me, the same table where he had expected me to surrender. Now it was quiet, standing, strong, just like the buildings I had spent my life designing. I smiled, because the foundation had never been weak. I had simply forgotten who built it. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, remember this: you don't have to destroy yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. You don't have to keep patching cracks created by people who refuse to change. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is finally say, enough. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button, subscribe to Dad's Cold Revenge, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own family betrayed you like this? Because sometimes karma doesn't arrive with a warning. Sometimes, you have to build the foundation yourself.